disrespected my parents in my heart, and I love them, right? And so I wanted them to be right, but I just wanted to understand it. And so even when I left at 20, I still had this feelings of guilt and couldn't help it. Like I had to go see what was out there. And a lot of my 20s, riding my bike by myself and thinking about it.
And that's the key. It was the bike that took you away. Two decades ago, in the summer of 2005, I took out a map of Pennsylvania and went looking for Lancaster County. An American author called Daniel Coyle had just written a book about Lance Armstrong with a fascinating cast of characters that included, well, Lance obviously, his girlfriend Sheryl Crow, his doctor Michele Ferrari, and his rival Jan Ullrich. The most interesting character, however, was one of his teammates, a 29-year-old Pennsylvanian who'd been raised as a Mennonite in Lancaster County, or Amish country as it is often referred. He called this chapter the Book of Floyd. Here's what it said.
Mennonites believe that God's message shines most brightly through an unadorned surface. When Floyd Landis was 16 years old, his parents' message to him shone as clear as if it had been painted in bright white letters on the clean brick wall of the family house. If you continue in competitive cycling, your soul will burn for eternity. It was written down as it happens in Romans 12:2 and 1 Peter 3:3-4, and several other texts, if not in particular, then in vivid generality. Floyd knew these texts well, having attended church on Wednesdays, Saturdays and twice on Sundays with his parents, brother and 4 sisters. Sitting on the hard wooden pews as a boy, Landis had felt lucky. He was a Landis, of a plain, decent family, not well off in money, but rich in spirit. He lived in Farmersville, near the towns of Landis and Landisville. His ancestor, Hans Landis, had martyred himself for the cause back in 1614. His most recent ancestors had moved to Lancaster County in order to build lives of hard work, humility and, above all, separateness from the world. To live, as the Mennonite saying went, in the world, but not of the world. For the Landises, this meant no television, no dancing, no revealing clothing, no uncovered heads for the women, no swimming in public pools, and no coveting of worldly goods of fame and sex and ego. No mingling with the unrighteous, and no backsliding. Other things, however, were permitted. Radios, cars, zippers, and, when Floyd was 15, a bicycle.
Cole's book, Lance Armstrong War, was published in June 2005, and a year later Floyd Landis became the third American in history to win the Tour de France. As luck would have it, I was covering the Tour that summer and watched Floyd on the day he captured the yellow jersey in the Pyrenees, his extraordinary stage win in the Alps at Morzine, and his victory parade on the Champs-Élysées. Then, 3 days later, Floyd was busted for doping. He protested his innocence for 4 years and lost almost everything in the legal battles that ensued, until he finally decided to tell the truth, toppling a domino that would lead to the fall of Armstrong. 6 months later, in November 2010, Floyd Landis was still being referred to by newspapers as the proven liar and drugs cheat when I travelled to California and sat down with him for the first time at a cabin in the San Jacinto Mountains. The interview took 7 hours. The edited transcript ran to almost 35,000 words. That wasn't a book, but it should have been, because I'd spent a lifetime in professional sport and nobody had ever spoken more truth. This is where it all began, a small country farmhouse in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Let's see if anybody's home. Hello, Floyd.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Welcome to Farmersville.
Thank you. When you were 10 years old, there was a fantastic film called Witness made about someone from our world coming into this world, the Amish world, as it were. And that was my first sense of this world here. And it was very different. It looked very different. It looked kind of mad. Did it seem, growing up to you, did it seem different when you were growing up? Did you feel different?
Not at all until till I went to school, to public school, because by that time most of the Mennonites and the Amish had sort of separated themselves in school as well. They had their own Mennonite schools. Amish have always had their own one-room schoolhouses, and some of the Mennonites as well. But then, over time, more people moved to this area from Philadelphia, and it became a little more diverse, religiously. And so my public school there were very few, I should say, conservative Mennonites there.
Very few.
Yeah, and so I felt different there, but still not as if I was from an entirely different place. I mean, these people, they may not have been Mennonites, but they lived around us, and we're not. The community isn't completely separate; they're sort of integrated.
It's kind of confusing when you come in here, because and you corrected me on this. When I saw, so you've got the Amish, you've got the Mennonites, but you've also got other Mennonites. So you've got Mennonites who grew up as you did, like your dad always had cars, and you had a car, but also Mennonites in buggies. And then Amish then are separate again, a different level again.
Yeah, and even within the Amish, there are different churches with slightly different rules. None of those rules have anything to do specifically with some biblical belief or anything. All these, the variations of those rules are purely how they want to distinguish them, how much they want to distinguish themselves from the world or from each other, because the churches like to say, this is our church or this is our group, and not that we're better or right or wrong, just this is how we distinguish ourselves, by slightly different dress, or like maybe the horse and buggies are a little bit different or a different color. I mean, not color, but either gray or black. But and then there were Mennonite churches that had rules about their cars too. Specifically, like the cars had to be black, or ours wasn't quite that restrictive. But again, all of those rules were those were from the underlying belief that, or philosophy, that we're trying to be separate from the rest of the world as a Mennonite church in general. And the reason for that is just simply avoid temptations and avoid the access to things that are going to, otherwise, cause you to want to sin as a human being.
Right.
But the churches in general are as an underlying. They call themselves Anabaptists, right? They believe that children should choose to be baptized, not baptized at birth, which is, I believe, why my understanding is why they left Europe in the first place a few hundred years ago, because they were sort of outcast by the Catholic Church and by the other institutional churches there that believed that you're baptized at birth, and so they were persecuted, and they left, and they came here and created a community, and they decided that we're just not going to embrace technology as, and I imagine, a few hundred years ago they weren't that different, but over time they didn't change, right? And everything else changed, and so now it's dramatic.
Right.
It's really profound.
Yeah. So you are, let's start here. Your parents, your dad is Paul Landis, your mother Arlene Sensenig. They have 6 kids: Alice, Floyd, Robert, Charity, Priscilla, and Abigail. So you're second born.
Yeah.
But the Bible is an essential part of your life from pretty much as soon as you're born.
Yes, everything about life as a Mennonite or Amish revolves around the Bible and the belief that you're either going to heaven or hell, and there's no point in risking going to hell just purely for conveniences and things like that. Not that those conveniences are believed to be what would send you to hell, but the idea that it's easier to follow the Bible, their interpretation of it, than when you simply don't put yourself in situations where you have temptation. That's their belief.
Right. And for you, that involves church Wednesdays and twice on Sundays. And it's fair to say you don't particularly enjoy it.
Oh, as a kid, I mean, look, it's hard to sit still as a young boy, right, to begin with. And so it's just kind of repetitive when you're a boy and you're not. I mean, as you get older and it becomes, if you stay in the church and the community, it becomes your social circle, and it's more of a just way of getting together at different times during the week, and especially on Sundays, and just being around other people in a spiritual setting. But as a kid, that's not. I mean, it's more just like, okay, now I just have to sit here for an hour, and I don't want to do that.
Sunday school it started with that, where, well, you would all kind of get together in the main area around 9, and they would sing a few gospel songs, and then kids would disperse to different classrooms, more like by age, and then they would have their like an hour-long sort of, Bible study of whatever age-appropriate thing, and then at 10, they'd all get back together in the main area, they'd sing some more songs, and then there'd be like a main sermon where a preacher would speak for 45 minutes or whatever time was left, and usually it ended by 11, but I mean, sometimes it was 11:30 or 12. It was kind of flexible when it ended. But yeah, Sunday school was kind of like the kids separate from the adults.
And then you'd come back in the evenings.
Yeah, usually Sunday evening, sometimes Saturday evening as well. Then every week there was a Wednesday evening service that my parents often liked to come to. So we spent a lot of time here.
So you're talking to an Irish Catholic who used to run out of the church straight as soon as communion was served. That seems like, that doesn't seem a lot of fun for you.
Oh man, so our version of communion, because this is the Anabaptist religions like the Mennonites and the Amish believe that you have to decide to accept Jesus in your heart to become part of the church, right? So typically this would happen, I don't know, there was no expectation, you could do it whenever, but like generally speaking, you're 12 or whenever age you become aware, you have a free choice, right? You're choosing to do it, but really it's kind of extortion, right? If you don't, you're going to hell. So everyone did. And once you become part of the church, then you're baptized. And then communion for us was, you actually would wash another man's feet. Because the men and the women sit separate here. Like, they don't sit together, right? So the men and the women on each side would have these pans of water, and you would wait in lines, and you go up, and I always hated it because it was like some old man, I'd have to wash his feet, and then dry them off. But this wasn't, we didn't do it every week. It wasn't like a communion in the Catholic Church or something like that. It was more, probably once every 3 or 4 months. It wasn't too often. But I kind of dreaded communion in that sense. That wasn't really my favorite thing.
No, I don't. I don't blame you.
I was thinking I should have waited longer. I could have avoided a few more years of this.
But it was also midweek as well.
Yeah, there was always a Wednesday evening service. My dad liked to come to that. He just really liked church. I mean, that was their social circle. But for me, it was more just a dread. Like, oh man, I'm a kid. I don't want to go to church again. And then we had winter Bible school and summer Bible school, which is often 2 weeks of every night of another hour-and-a-half service. Just sitting there listening to the same sort of, not the same, but I mean, at the end, it became redundant at some point, right? It's just, I don't mean to diminish the value of it, because as far as religions go, I don't believe that it has any downside, but it wasn't for me.
School was a different environment completely than home and church, because the public school was predominantly people who were not conservative Mennonites, right? And for me, I think
You're dressed differently, are they? They look different.
Yeah, they just dress. No, they don't have a specific dress code like the
There's no
Mennonites
uniform.
do. No.
Okay, but you felt different.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, explain that to me.
Well, it's different little things. Like, and as a kid, they're meaningless now, but like as a kid, you kind of want to fit in, right? And so, like in gym class, I wasn't allowed to wear shorts, and everyone was expected to wear shorts. But I mean, there was always an exception, because this town, everyone here, every institution knows that the Mennonites have their own way of life, and it's respected. So they say, okay, you don't have to wear shorts, and just little things like that, right? Little things where it's like, okay, well, I'm different. And different in a way to me that didn't, like, logically, make sense. I mean, I understood the belief system, and I guess at the time I didn't really appreciate the reasons why they had these rules, which are not about the religion itself so much as about being just modest and humble and not putting yourself in a position where there's temptation, right? I think that's the reason why the women dress the way they do. It's not about controlling the women or demanding they dress that way. It's more like, look, men are men and they have impulses, and we don't deny that, and so don't put women in front of them in a setting where there's some temptation, right?
Okay, right.
And to me, it was more like I just conflated the whole thing. Like, why do we have these dumb rules? I don't really understand it. And, you know, there was anxiety about not fitting in. I mean, it's hard to deny that. I mean, it's much.
You
as
want to fit
it
in. You want
sounds.
to fit in with other kids. That's
Yeah,
a given. Yeah.
you need at least a group of kids where you feel like you fit in. And I mean, I had friends there that couldn't have cared less, but to me it mattered, and so it caused a lot of
Friction.
I mean, did cause some friction, but it was more just
Friction at home, I mean.
questions. Yeah, just
Yeah.
questions like why.
What are the questions?
Well, they weren't necessarily about the rules themselves. It was more, to me, it would deduce it to something more fundamental, like what.
Sin.
Yeah, like this whole idea to begin with. Like, I'm told here that I'm born a sinner, and then I have to choose to ask for forgiveness for something that I had no control over. To me, I couldn't accept that. Like, I would debate it forever with my parents. Like, I just don't understand. Like, how are you telling me that I was born having done something wrong when I didn't even, I mean, if I was given the option to be put here to begin with, then fine, then I chose it, right? Even then, it would be hard to justify that belief, but to me, it was like, no, don't tell me I did something wrong. I didn't do anything. And I struggled with that, and with that underlying just inability to accept that, then everything that came out of that was a question, like, okay, then why are we doing this, or why are we doing that? And I'm sure it annoyed my parents, because at some point, in hindsight, like, I can see there's kind of inflection points as you progress as a kid and you start to become an adult, where my brothers and sisters just chose to accept it.
And you didn't.
No, I didn't. It's not that I even. The thing was,
See, it's framed in the Coyle book and in that chapter as a rebellion, but it wasn't a rebellion for you. Was it?
No, I never had anything but love and respect for my parents, and they were never anything but just loving parents to me. And maybe in their own way, you could interpret their discipline methods and things like that as, I mean, society sort of frowns on, spanking your kid repeatedly. But they believed that's what the Bible told them to do, and so even that, it was like I didn't like it, but I didn't really resent them for it. It was more just a logical confusion to me. Like, well, this is clearly, you can see this isn't working. Like,
Yeah.
if I do something where I get hurt because I didn't listen to you, and then you spank me, it's like, well, I already have pain, so more pain isn't going to change that. Either I learned the lesson or I didn't. So how long are we going to do this before either I decide I've had enough and accept it, or leave, or you decide that this just isn't working, and whatever, we'll let it be.
And at what stage had you had enough? Did you decide you had enough, or was it as simple as that?
No, it was never. There was never a point where, even when I left, like I as much as I'm laying out sort of the logic in my head and why I had questions and why I didn't understand it, I still to some extent believed it, because I never disrespected my parents in my heart, and I loved them, right? And so I wanted them to be right, but I just wanted to understand it. And so even when I left at 20, I still had this feelings of guilt, and then I was doing something wrong. I couldn't help it. Like, I had to go see what was out there. And I know it hurt my parents, and I don't know if they even understood that part. If they felt like it was just he's rebelling and one day he'll come back. I mean, I think there was some hope. This prodigal son story, like he'll come home one day, and I'm sure there was with my mom, because I could tell it broke her heart when I left. And she, I think, if she was really honest with herself, she probably knew I wasn't coming back. But yeah, it kind of broke my heart, and I felt horrible about it. So it wasn't like it was just all of a sudden freedom when I left. Like now I'm free to do whatever, because I still had a lot to learn about the world anyway. It wasn't like I could just leave and the world would make sense. I had to start over and figure out why they have the ideas they have, or don't believe what I believe. And I spent a lot of my 20s riding my bike by myself and thinking about it.
And that's the key. It was the bike that took you away. That was it. The bike.
Yeah, that was a reason to leave, and it was also kind of a therapy for me. And there's like anybody that is the kind of personality that gets addicted to cycling probably has a similar sort of reason for doing it, right?
Yeah.
It's like meditation. It's a form of just, I don't know, you're moving, but you're thinking, and you can let your mind wander, and it was really helpful for me.
And that started that Green Mountain Cyclery.
Yeah, that was the bike shop that I was initially got my first sort of bike that I would race on. And Mike, the guy that ran it, Mike, he and his wife, I mean, they embraced me. I'm sure they thought it was funny, like this little kid has no idea what he's doing and just wears sweatpants, but he's better than us, so it's funny to have him around. And they were good. Like, I enjoyed it. They were all a couple years older than me for the most part. And so they just sort of embraced me. And when they did do their Wednesday night rides at the state park, mountain bike trails not far from here, and things like that.
You became a legend, inverted commas legend, pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, look,
because you're different.
Well, it was different, but I was also really talented. Like, it wasn't even, I mean, and I don't even say that as boasting. It just happened to be the case, right?
Yeah.
I happened to be really good at it, and I really liked it, and so I was obsessed with it. And so to me, it was probably something different than their perception of it was. It was like there's this crazy Mennonite kid that comes around, and he's funny to watch because he crashes a lot and doesn't really care, but he's pretty good at it. And so, yeah, I became pretty close friends with them.
They came in looking for Floyd's first real bicycle. And I kind of think his dad had a completely different kind of bike in mind than Floyd did. His dad was thinking, a bike for him to go over and work and that kind of thing. And Floyd came in with a very good idea that he wanted one of those crazy looking mountain bikes. And back in the 90s, really bright, crazy neon colors were all the rage. Every mountain bike was neon green, neon orange, purples, pinks, all that kind of stuff, which also didn't go over real well with his dad. But Floyd instantly fell in love with a brand called Marin that was, like you said, I believe it was a Mer Woods. And it was all because of the color. That's all it was because of the color. But he bought this thing, and immediately, that was instantly freedom for Floyd. They started asking, hey, where can we ride these things in the woods? Where can we go? And so on. And I guess he knew or learned that I had a pretty big mountain bike team at the time, and we went riding a lot. And we had training races every Wednesday nights at a local Boy Scout camp area. And he kind of talked his parents into letting him ride up there and ride with us. Well, it turned out very quickly that there was a whole lot of natural talent in Floyd. He could go ride with us, who were grown, expert level mountain bikers, and he'd be riding along, talking while he's climbing a hill. And half the guys, the tongue's hanging out, and he's jabbering away like there's no tomorrow. He knew I ran a mountain bike race locally, and the cross-country race was on a Sunday. So first off, we had to talk his parents into letting him go to a mountain bike race instead of church, okay, which he managed to do. And we put him in a jersey, and he showed up with orange sweatpants on and a yellow and purple Green Mountain Cycler jersey, which, of course, did not match at all. The way we used to have to run these races is, he raced the beginner class because it's the first time he'd ever done anything like that. And we started out with different age categories. The faster riders, the older guys started first. Juniors started pretty much just about last. And it was a 9-mile course. Beginners did 1 lap. Bear in mind, there were 150 riders in front of him. And in 1 lap, he managed to win his class easily and beat over half the field in sweatpants in August. And he was hooked. I mean, after that, it was downhill from there, as you would say. He was hooked. He absolutely loved it.
Listen carefully to Mike and what impressed him most about Floyd at 15. It wasn't just that the kid had talent, it was his desire.
So you knew pretty quick he was sort of special.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. He'd go to mountain bike. He'd show up at that time there were road bike races in the local area that were not sanctioned. They were called citizens races. Anybody who wanted to could race. He'd show up on a mountain bike and stay with the top guys all day. As a kid. Well, and at that point, no talent whatsoever, just raw horsepower. And I'm convinced he could have picked any endurance sport of the day and he would have been a champion at it, whether it's, running, cycling, swimming, it didn't matter. It just so happens Floyd loves bikes. And he moved out to California to be able to race. And I think eventually mountain biking was starting to, I don't want to say die, but the top tier stuff was starting to lose its luster a bit. And, from there, he started racing road bikes locally in that area. And just like he did on the mountain bikes, he started kicking everybody's butt. I mean, he showed up and they're like, well, you're not you don't have a pro license in road racing. And he's like, well, I can't, if you have me race with everybody else, it's going to be a joke. And it was. So they immediately allowed him to start racing pro. And
Was there anything else about him, Mike, apart from his obvious physical ability, that stood out about him back then
well,
as a kid?
yeah. For a kid his age, his ability to suffer, which is usually something that's learned when you're a little older, was mind-boggling. He would literally, when he started racing for GT, he was always coming in the shop and always hanging out and riding with us and everything else. But he would get on his bike in Farmersville and go do a 100-mile day on a mountain bike, on the road, and find every big hill he could possibly climb and just climb it. I mean, what 15, 16-year-old kid does that? They don't. Now you can barely get him to ride a bike that doesn't have a motor attached to it, electric motor attached to it. All he wanted to do was ride all day long, every day.
Yeah, the mountain bike races were fun. Like you had these trails and you just see what you could do on your bike. And a lot of it was just because, the race part was obviously your focus and trying to win, but it was like, see what you can do on your bike. It's entirely different than the road scene. But I don't know. I never really thought about that.
When you were, my whole, just knowing your attitude, all you want to do is go have fun. Well, the road racing scene at that time, yeah.
I just wanted to see what was out there. What was out there was another God, an idol who had beaten cancer, and a very different church, the Brotherhood of the Needle.
In the next episode.
Yeah, I knew I was fucked because I don't have anybody to call. No one's going to help me. Lance isn't going to take the fall from me. He's not even going to defend me.
You can support our journalism by becoming a subscriber to the Irish Independent.